Up here, outlines coming around. So we have been talking about discipleship in going through the Sermon on the Mount. And last week we went through the Jesus, have you read, or you have said, or you have heard it said, but I tell you, right? And one of the things that we walked away with is that Jesus is just explaining the true essence of the law of Moses anyway, right? So it's not that the law of Moses was this very rigid, just checklist kind of religion, but that there was supposed to be intent and heart behind it. And ultimately, and we didn't fully finish, so I want to kind of backtrack just a little bit. You need more? How many more? Who doesn't have them? 10? Oh, wow. Okay. One moment. I'm going to print them. I ended my print early because I was creating a line. I got here too late. I won't explain why because it doesn't matter. I'm late. You wouldn't believe me anyway. At least three? Okay, well, I printed 12. You said 10. All right, so Matthew chapter 5. Someone read for us this tonight. We're just going to jump right in to, instead of my little exercises, they sometimes take time. Someone read 43 through 48 of Matthew chapter 5. Who wants to read? Let's see hands, Cindy. Go ahead. I'm going to put this right here for you. 43 to the end of the chapter, yes.
Okay. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
And isn't this ultimately what we are striving for? Right? So that you may be sons of God. That's discipleship. So that you may be sons of God. Now, interestingly enough, Jesus says that to be a son of God, you have to be a kind of person. Right? It's not just something that happens to you or something that you do at a one-time event. Right? There's not a one-time event. Now, in this context that we're talking about, that you can say, because of this one-time event, therefore, I am a son of God. In this context, to be able to claim that you are a son of God, you have to be a kind of person. And what kind of person is he describing? So Christ-like. What particular characteristic are we talking about? Well, this forgiving, obviously. Love. Right? Love has to be the definitive characteristic for you to be considered a son of God. Because what we're ultimately striving for is not just to be the son of God, but to be like our Father. That's discipleship. You can describe discipleship with these three verses. It didn't print? Well, are there people sharing? The printer may be low on toner.
Yeah, I had to do that last time.
It's waiting. Well, with me with these, we may not even use all of it. So I'm backing up, covering a little bit from last week right now, just kind of catching up. But that you may be a certain kind of person. There's a reason why I'm doing that. But we are trying to be like our Father. And in discipleship, right? And I've been in a lot of young men's training classes. And the purpose of these young men's training classes are to, a lot of times, to do what? Have anyone ever been a part of like a young men, or young ladies training class? Right? I'm sorry, I'm signaling out half the group here. Has anyone been a part of a young person's training class? A lot of times for the young men, we want men, we want them to grow up to be, men in the church. We want to teach them certain things. What are a lot of things you get taught in that young men's training class? How to song lead. How to pray. Well, and I would even say the how to pray, the ones that I've been a part of have borne more like, make sure your welcome prayer is not the same as your closing prayer, right? Make sure your the Lord's Supper prayer has a, intention behind it, which are great things, by the way. I'm not saying those are bad, but that's not teaching someone how to pray. Jesus was not, when he gives this, let me show you how to pray, he is not trying to, give you a specific for, training you in a, what we'd call a worship setting. He's wanting you to understand what is prayer, right? What is prayer? Why are we praying? What's the importance of when you are up there leading people's minds in prayer? What are you doing? Right? What are you accomplishing? Is the purpose for you to get up because maybe you don't like praying, just to get it done with? Right? And to maybe say some words that you've heard other people say, and that's kind of how my default was, okay, there's some key phrases that every man uses, right? Guide, guard, and direct. And, even the amen didn't really meant, but obviously it's not a prayer until the amen's thrown on, right? So there's a lot of phrases that I was taught through example, but I still didn't know what praying was. What's the purpose of it? God knows exactly what I need, doesn't he? God knows what's in my heart. He knows what's in my mind. What am I doing when I pray? Okay, and so what Jesus is trying to get at, and what we're about to look at tonight, is there were three main public displays of religion. Things that you would, if you did, you would be considered a religious person. Okay? The first one's praying. Now, specifically in the Jewish culture, there were times in which you would pray. So you'd be walking through the market, you'd be anywhere you were, and at a certain time, you'd be like, oh, it's time to pray. And what is the most popular prayer? Who else doesn't have a, whatever they're called, outline? Who needs an outline? Good, Raymond? All right. So you would stop and you would pray. Now, what if you're in the middle of Walmart? What would a Jew do? Well, a Jew doesn't go to Walmart. I understand that. All right. What if you're at the meat market, right, and they're flaying up a nice fish? Oh, they didn't eat that. All right. You're out in the market, okay? What'd they do? They'd stop. They would position themselves towards Jerusalem, the temple, and they would pray. What was the most famous prayer? Someone just turned me off. The Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, right? Our God is one God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And that would be a prayer that at least once a day they would do that. And there were two other scheduled times they would pray. Now, if you're a person who really wants people to see your religion, where do you make sure you are when you're praying? Oh, it's getting time. I might want to go to where people are, right? And sometimes, and the Pharisees, by the way, had a practice that they would even carry a stool with them. They'd carry what we call them a stool, more like a bucket. They'd turn upside down. They would stand up on this bucket. They would do a bit, so everybody knew that they were about to pray. Now, when you read Jewish writings, what they were doing it for was so people would be courteous and respectful that you were about to pray and they would walk around you. Well, what did it turn into? Like everything, a show, okay? And so this is the kind of thing, and like fasting. Fasting was something religious people did, and then also giving alms. And we're going to talk about all these, but giving alms is the big one, right? You see a beggar on the street, and there's loads of beggars. Jesus came in loads of beggars. What would religious people do to show that they were religious? You gave money. Now, you can give money, or you can say, see what I'm doing? Here, poor fellow. All right, not even caring who it is or what you're doing for this person, but you're trying to get attention. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were teaching and were doing. That was the practice that they had. Okay? And so what Jesus is saying is these practices are good. Please pray. Please pray publicly. Don't not pray during the times of prayer. Don't not fast. Don't not give alms. But you need to do it in a way that is different. Now, Jesus also, he seems a little contradictory to me, right? At first glance, in chapter 5, he told us to do our work so that what? Men can see him. And now he's going to tell us, don't even let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Don't let people see what you're doing. Don't let people know. Someone explain that to me.
To be seen but not seen. You want them to see the action, but not notice you're the person that's doing that action. If your right hand does something where your left hand doesn't know, it's, how do I put this in the right way? Don't look at the man behind the curtain. That's the best way to explain it to everybody in here. You're supposed to do something, but the person that's doing it's not the important part.
Okay.
That's what that is.
Okay, so what you're doing, right, is more important than the who's doing it. Okay, I get that, right? The fact of the matter is if someone sees me doing something, it's not that I'm the one doing it, it's that there's an act of righteousness being done, right? There's an act of mercy being done, right? I'm not, in the glory. Anyone else?
The world can't see, not that we're doing.
Oh, sorry, yes. Haha, just when my wife was speaking.
She didn't use it either.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
You should make her
I didn't
repeat
see people
everything.
waving the mic in the back.
I said not that the point is to be seen when we're doing it, but the world needs to see us and think something is different about us. Otherwise, they're not going to ask questions.
Okay, so part of it is if we do everything so secretively, how will anybody know that one, who is not the who's behind the act, but who's behind the who? Right? Who's the one influencing the world? God. Right? And his people. Right? But if people never even know that the why of what you're doing, then how are they ever going to be pointed towards God? Anyone else? Think about that? Shh, baby's sleeping.
Be a good example. Be a good example, but don't do it for show. Do it just because you're genuinely wanting to, I don't know, be a good help.
Yeah. So you're being an example. It's like the person, you see something going, you ever have someone at your house? We used to have someone come to our house, and they'd come over for dinner, and immediately they'd start doing the dishes. Right? Had a buddy of ours preaching school. He came to our house to eat. My wife was almost like, I'm going to stop inviting you to eat if you don't stop doing dishes. And he didn't do it because, oh, look, see, he genuinely just wanted to serve, wanted to help out. He's like, well, she cooked. I'm gonna do the dishes. And he saw a need. He jumped in and he did it, but he wasn't thinking, oh, there's an opportunity for me to show people how righteous he just jumped in. And when you do that, you can't help but be noticed. There will be times it won't be noticed, and you still do it, and there'll be times that you're noticed. Can anyone give a really good Bible example of this? Mike.
Well, I was just thinking about the times that Jesus would confront someone who was in need of his assistance in some way. And invariably, a lot of times this would be one-on-one interactions, someone who just approached him or he approached somebody. And Jesus did his work, and then didn't matter what he said, it got out.
Even when he told them
And people noticed.
not to.
He didn't do it in front of people, but people noticed because the word got spread. So even if we are doing things in secret, people are going to notice that you're doing good things, probably because they're going to tell other people. That's how it worked with Jesus' ministry so many times. He did it in secret. It got public.
Yeah.
Not because he made it public, but because it was different.
Yeah. And, and then a part of Jesus' work was a public ministry, right? So there was the secretive part of it. But he wanted people to know that he was the Messiah. And if the news never got out, it's really hard to get noticed as the Messiah if no one knows you're the Messiah, right? So, and that's the same thing with the church. It's kind of like a dual, right? You're going about and doing good. You know it's going to get out, right? And you're okay with it getting out as long as, what does Jesus say when he says, so that they may see your good works? What's the ending of that statement? What does he keep going? So that they may glorify the Father who is in heaven, right? Even in John 9, when the man's born blind, when people are asking, why was this man born blind? And what is Jesus' statement? He was born blind so that the works of God may be displayed. So there are opportunities that God creates that the works of God can be displayed. But once again, you're not trying, as you're going, you're going to run into people, you're going to do things, and they're going to talk. That is why when we do good, people need to know why we're there for them. Well, look what God has done for me, right? They need to know the why we're there. If it's just some random stranger, which I'm not saying every time you help somebody, you got to do a whole gospel pitch. It wouldn't hurt, right? But if someone's just like, yeah, this random person came up to me and helped me and walked away, how is that person ever going to know that it was a God thing? If there's not a God conversation, if there's not a God, some kind of influence in that.
Jesse White's not here to tell me to not say this, so I'm going to
Wait for the mic.
brag on her for a moment. Well, I'm talking to Mike,
Sorry, Jesse.
something that stood out to me one time, I think it was, something that stood out to me one time, it was in a ladies' meeting, and we were talking about our community outreach subgroup of the ministry, and Jessie White has kind of been a lead on it sometimes, and she said that, I'm trying to word this appropriately, in the past, the community may have known a lot about what the church disliked or what we stood for, like we're for this and we stand against this. And she said, but we want to make sure that the community knows we're there in a positive way. So no, not every time we reach out and do something are we handing out tracts or preaching them a sermon, but how many times have we now consistently shown up at Lenore City High School and said, we're putting this breakfast on for you because we see you, we appreciate you, and they see our logo all over the stuff. How many times have we reached out to first responders and said, we see you, we appreciate you, this is where we are? And I feel like that part sometimes gets left out, because even myself for a while, it was like, well, if we're not getting people in the doors and we don't give them something and then they show up to church the next Sunday, like, what's the point? Why are we doing it? But you never know how many repeated times it's going to take for someone to be like, I remember when that church was there and they cared. And so I think just getting our name out there like that is really important.
Yeah, and that's kind of the rub, and I say in a good way, right? Because have you ever been accused of, when you're trying to do something, you ever been accused of a false motive? No one? Ever? Yeah? Right? And you know what you're trying to do. You know why you're trying to do it. And, but there's a lot of times where a false motive, when someone starts throwing those false motives out, it can discourage you from ever being seen again. And so same thing with kind of like, doing stuff community-wise. We don't want people to think we're doing this, oh, look at us, we're better than other people, look at us, but it is if they don't know who's doing it, if they don't know why we're doing it, they don't know where we're at, once again, you can do good, but there's got to be, when that person's in need, they got to remember who did good and where to find them, right? And where to go when they are actually in need. And that'll get you.
Okay. I don't want to sound like a braggart or anything. I was at McDonald's and I was having a conversation with a friend, and this lady came up and stood right beside her table with her arms, like she was just holding onto her hands. And when I finished what I was saying, we both looked at her. She said, "Can you pray for me?" And I was like, "Do we know each other?" She said, "I've seen you in here. You walk up to people and you've laid hands on them, and you'll just pray for somebody in the parking lot. I saw you at Walmart last week holding somebody's hands and praying. Will you pray for me? I'm going to surgery this week." I didn't say anything to her. I don't think anybody else said anything to her. But people see what you're doing, even when you don't think they do.
Yeah, and then when they're in the need, who are they going to go to? Like if someone's like, "Hey, I need prayer," they're not going to their neighbor who's not a Christian, right? Not that they're Christians, the non-Christian's a bad person, but if they're seeking prayer, who are they going to go to? Someone who prays, right? It reminds me of Daniel, right? Remember when Daniel, they cocked this whole scheme against him? Well, how did they even know that Daniel prayed? Consistency. He just did it. Now, where did Daniel go when he did it? He went into his inner room, right? He went to his house, in a closet, closed the door, and yet, even that, which I would say is as secretive as you can get, there was a conversation somewhere along the way. "Hey, Daniel, where do you go 3 times a day?" "Oh, well, I believe in God, and I pray, and this is why." I'm sure those conversations have come up. I mean, he's an advisor to the king who, when he interpreted dreams, remember when Nebuchadnezzar was like, "This man interprets dreams," and Daniel goes, "It wasn't me. Like, I didn't interpret anything. God is the one who interpreted the dream." So he was there to fill the gap when someone was in need, and when someone asked why or how, he said it was God. And so they knew when he was going to pray, because when they make the law, where do they just happen to show up? At Daniel's house at a certain time. Right when Daniel's praying, they didn't have to camp out. They knew he was going to be there. Daniel wasn't trying to be a showboat. Daniel was just trying to be a disciple of God living in an exile country, which is really probably one of the closest examples we have. We don't live in a theophany where God's rule and God's reign is law here in the United States, right? And so we are in exile. We are in exile, okay? And so we kind of live like that. All right, so any other comments, questions? We're going to jump in and do some reading. Someone else have something? Pointing. Bob. Oh, I knew Bob. Here, where's the room? Sorry.
I was going to say the hurricane's a great example of how we can help people and let them know who is helping them, so that in the future they know there's that helping hand of Christians ready and willing to help them.
Yes. And this gets back to, why are we having a class on discipleship again? What was the very first class? Who did we have in here? The very first class. We had our teens. And I gave you all a challenge, the very first class, and I probably should be repeating it every Sunday or every Wednesday, but I don't want to feel like a broken record, to be mentors. And in those moments where the church is coming together to deliver goods, to, help out in communities, it can be easy to go yourself because you've got the time, you've got the space. What would be a better opportunity to take a young one when you're going to do those things and say, hey, come with me, watch what happens when you serve a community who's hurting. Right? It may not be fun to take a kid sometimes, right? They may not want to be there at all times, but I'll tell you, those things have changed people's complete perspectives. How many of you have heard people who have gone over to India or gone over to a third world country and did some kind of mission work and says, if you haven't gone, you must go? What do they mean by that? What they mean is, until you see the gospel really work with the poor or really work in those kind of communities, see what other people live like, right? It changes who you are. And so when we are discipling and when we are practicing these things ourselves, right, I think one of the greatest things is, Ben all the time, used to, but we told him now, like, why do we take this Lord's Supper thing? Oh, it's what baptized people do. If that's your answer, you have squandered an awesome opportunity to talk about Christ, the resurrection, his death, his blood being shed. You have an awesome opportunity to go all the way back to the Passover in Egypt. I mean, to tell the whole story by one question: why do you do this thing? Why are we making this meal for this person? Right? And there's so many biblical stories that we can use to be teaching and mentoring our young kids. And so, if Jesus' own disciples are going to ask, teach us how to pray. These are grown men. They don't know how to pray, and they're Jews. And these are Jews who probably have done the Shema prayer, have done the written and rote prayers, and they still feel like they don't know how to do what? Why do you think their view of prayer has been challenged hanging out with Jesus? When?
Probably because he didn't make a big show out of it.
Well, he didn't make a big show out of it. Now, did he pray around his disciples often? Do you think Jesus' prayer sounded a little different than the prayers they were used to hearing?
He didn't battle and drum all along.
Right? He didn't do it to be heard. But in Jesus' prayers, what are some things he starts with? What's one of his first lines? Our Father. And as the Son of God, right? As the Son of God, do you think he said that with, Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven? You think it was just this rogue, gotta get it out prayer? Or do you think there was some passion, some intimacy? Because he knew the Father, right? And they're hearing, there are people that pray that I'm jealous of. You ever have that? They pray and you're just like, oh, man, that felt, you can feel the prayer. Not just hear, you're not impressed by how many words they use and how long it was or short it was, but you can tell when someone is close to God when they pray. Now, I don't judge every public prayer because some people just, they don't like public prayer. It's, whatever. But I've been with guys who've prayed over meals and prayed at dinners that they've invited me over for, and man, I'm like, wow, that's incredible. This is what Jesus is trying to get us to do. They weren't praying to be seen. A lot of my favorite prayers, people who pray, are people who I have not heard publicly do a prayer here, but I've been over their house and they've prayed. And I'm like, if you could bring that before the church, that'd be great. And they're like, I can't do it. They freeze up, right? But you get them in a group of 10, and it's powerful, right? We're not praying just to get something done. We are communicating with the Father. So let's start in verse 1. And let's read the first couple verses here. Beware of practicing your righteousness before people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. That's a pretty stinking serious statement. Beware. You ever walk somewhere and it says beware of dog? All right, I'm going to tell you right now, it says beware of dog. I'm on the other side of the road. I don't like dogs. I mean, I love dogs. I am terrified of dogs. I have a fear of dogs that I don't know, a terrible fear. I was bitten as a child, and when someone, and it can be out like a little chihuahua, beware of dog, and it's like this little ankle biter, and I have this tension that just builds up in my chest. When Jesus is using the word beware, we ought to what? Beware, right? For you will have no reward. He didn't say you're going to have some of your reward taken away. Is that me? Oh, someone's got the mic on. Someone just turned it off because it's rushing all around. He's not saying you're going to get a 50% reward or a 20% reduction, right? 10%'s off on your taxes. That's not what he's saying. Okay? No reward. Now, it could be for that individual event, right? Or that individual whatever it may be. But no reward from God in heaven. Who's got the mics? Both hold them up. Turn it off if the green light's on. Down the hall? Is there a werewolf down the hall? Okay, that's probably my son. Thus, look at verse 2. Thus, when you give to needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, and they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. Once again, if you're seeking a reward, and the reward could just be praise. It could just be, I want someone to acknowledge that I've done this thing. But if the person who you're not wanting the acknowledgement is anyone other than God, then yeah, you can receive your acknowledgement from men. You can get your praise from men, but who's not going to praise you for that thing? God won't. Okay? And I think that's a serious condemnation on some...
Like people do with mission work or giving, and they're getting ready to give something to somebody, and they're like, hold on, look at this $1,000 check I'm giving this homeless guy here, and they're selfieing themselves to put it on whatever social crap.
Yeah, and I try really hard not to judge those moments. I'm not saying that their fruits are not being exposed, but man, but it really just, there's something that churns inside of me, But once again, it gets back to I want people to know that, hey, there's this great work going on in India, but there's a lot of ways to let you know there's a work going on in India without, the iconic, let me get my face in with this selfie with this guy back here who's like, you've got a phone, you've got this, and he's sitting there. It can rub wrong. It can rub wrong. Right? And I know of people like Roberto in the Philippines. He finally said, if you're not going to come over here as a mission team and serve the needs of this community, you're going to come over and try to Americanize people, you're going to try to come over in your fancy suits, and you're going to try to come over and just do gospel meetings, and he's like, just don't come. It doesn't help us. Come into our communities. Look like one of the members of the community, dress like one of the members of the community, get down with the people in the community, get in their homes, right? And there's different ways you can do that. But if you're just going to go in and bring your American pop culture religion over to these places, that's not what they need. They need to be saved, right? They need the gospel. They need Jesus. And it's not for you to take back to your church and give a missions report. And if you don't have enough pictures, they're not going to believe you did anything. That's not why we're doing it, all right? Someone had a hand up. And I don't mean to get on mission.
As you just read a minute ago, there's two ways to get your reward. Trying to show off, which gets you the wrong kind of reward, or doing like the gospel teaches, help when you can help. Don't try to get acknowledgement or praise for what you're doing. Just do it as a Christian should do it.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so let's jump into 5 and 6 real quick. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. So what's a hypocrite? What's the Greek word for hypocrite? You don't need to know the Greek word, but what does it mean? Actor, play actor. So these are people who would perform on shows, perform on the street. They would pretend to be someone they're not. And ultimately, who can know whether you're doing something as a hypocrite or not? You know. God knows, right? But have you ever tried to maybe seem a little more religious than you are, just because you felt uncomfortable when people may have been talking about things they're doing or things, and you may exaggerate just a little bit just to make yourself feel a little more apart or a little more religious than you are? He says, don't do that. All right, first of all, part of religion is if you're broken and you're not doing it right or you feel like you're inadequate, that's a good start to being a religious person. Humility, blessed are the poor, right? Blessed are the meek. You have your hand? All right, Mike. Like, that's a good start. Like, take that feeling in as that mic's going on. Take that feeling in and develop that character of humility and not feeling like you're enough.
So, this is something I struggle with here because, somebody punches me in the face. I don't want to not punch them back.
I feel you.
I mean, there's things that I do because I'm a Christian that I don't want to do. And if we're just telling people, don't do it unless you mean it, there's a whole lot that I'm not going to do.
Okay, so let's define.
Because I'm doing it because I was told to do it, not because in my heart I really just don't want to hit people back.
So do you think Jesus ever had moments where he didn't want to, why do you think he told Peter to get behind me, Satan, when Peter came and said, we'll fight for you? I'm not saying Jesus was about to give into a temptation, right? But I'm saying, do you think that when Jesus was being whipped and put a crown of thorns on his head, that there was not even the faintest of thought, being a human, that, I could call 10,000 angels? Right? And I think the idea of wanting to do something and doing something because you're a disciple of Jesus are two different things. It's kind of like the desire to be an elder. People automatically assume the desire to be an elder is, I just really want to be an elder. I don't think that's the desire. I think it's the willingness to step up and to do something even if you don't feel like doing it, in the sense of the want to, but there has to be a desire in the sense of, this is what God is calling me to be. And I want to be a son of God.
Half of Paul's teachings talk about the fight between the natural instincts that you have and what you should be doing.
Yeah, in the spirit.
There's a gap there.
Yeah, and that's what you're trying to grow into.
But when we make blanket statements like, hey, if you don't mean it, just don't do it.
I think the statement Jesus is making is not that if you feel it, but if you're doing it to be showboaty, if you're doing it to be seen as men, but you don't want to do it, you're just doing it because it's going to give you some kind of praise, or it's going to put you into a spotlight, or because, like I said, you're in a group and everyone's saying, hey, I did this week, I did this week, and you're kind of like, and you almost create an event that's not there to seem religious, is kind of what I was saying.
Yeah.
But I think the desire and the meaning to is not always a fluffy feeling inside.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
Is I'm not always going to do things because that's just really in my heart of hearts just who I am. It's because I'm trying not to be who I am.
To be honest with you, I didn't want to come here tonight. And when I say that, I had some things that had happened today that I had really good reasons why, if I didn't want to come because I had a bad day, but I had to fight to kind of get here. Right now it's my job, so I kind of have to be here, right? But there are times where it's like, I don't want to be here. right? But I desire to be around God's people, and so that pushes me a little bit. I desire to do what God wants me to be, so that pushes me a little bit. So my desires are not always the same as my feelings. And I think sometimes we equate desire with feeling, right? With the gooey feeling. A desire is a commitment you're making, right? I'm going to do this.
Well, the more you do it, it's like training. Even if you start off, you don't like to do it, but you're just doing it because that's what you're supposed to do. The more and more you do it, you're molding, God's molding and shaping your heart to be like Him.
Yep.
To where that feeling of, I don't want to do this, may not fully go away, but it's my promise.
Yeah.
Do it because He's told me.
Yeah, and I think once you kind of take emotion out of it, you do things because of you're a disciple of Jesus more than. Everybody knows